Hey everybody, welcome to the second week of class. Thank you for all of your introductions and questions last week. I planned the first week to be kind of just an intro week so that everybody gets a chance to learn how to get online and use Blackboard and meet each other and kind of ease into the semester. So now we are going to jump into Unit 1 and really get into the meat of our course. So today I want to talk a little bit about the reading that you're going to be doing in our textbook, which is Back to the Lake. I'll actually refer to a couple sections if you have that available. It'd be helpful. And just a quick overview of where we're headed and what we're going to be doing. So the flow of our course is due dates are always Wednesdays and Sundays. And when I say Wednesday, I mean Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. and Sunday by 11:59 p.m. So make sure you just kind of build that into your schedule as you plan ahead for each week. I will open the unit or the next week the Friday night before the next week begins, because I know some people really need to use weekends to get ahead on their work for the next week. So the weeks will open the Friday night before that actual next week begins. And you'll notice that as we move through each unit, we have the same flow for our process. So the first week of the unit's going to be reading and discussing and thinking ideas. The second week will be thinking and writing our ideas. And then the last week or third week of each unit is going to be the revising and final drafting. So we kind of move through this flow of what writers actually do, which is read, think, discuss, think, write, think, revise, think, final draft. So you'll notice that each of our units is about 3 weeks long, and they all follow that same process. But again, your due dates are always going to be Wednesdays and Sundays, so make sure you plan ahead for that. All right, so let's dig into this week's reading. You'll be reading Chapter 1 and Chapter 6, and I just wanted to point out a great quote on page 2 of the textbook in the second paragraph, and it's referring to how good writers are good readers. The best way we can learn to strengthen our writing is by becoming better and more critical readers. This is something I work on myself all the time. And so in the second paragraph, it says, consequently, good writers are usually good readers. They may not read every book in the library, but they read critically, paying close attention to the strategies and techniques that accomplished writers use all the time for presenting their ideas. I cannot emphasize that enough. I often relate it to athletes who watch videos of themselves or other athletes or the team, and they analyze the golf stroke or the throw that they've made with the football or the baseball, right? And so we learn best by watching others do it. And in this case, we watch others write by reading their work. And so we have a few readings this week, I'll show you here, posted in week 2, 3 different essays that you will be reading, one by Frederick Douglass, one by Malcolm X, and one by Sherman Alexie. And the discussion board asks you to pick out the favorite quotes you have from each of those essays and to break it down. Why did you like that quote? Not necessarily because of what it said or what it expressed, but what was the power in how the writer expressed it. Okay, what was the sentence structure? What was the word choice? What was the language the authors used? So this is how we analyze writing so that we can start to use those techniques and those strategies in our own writing. Okay, so it's a little bit different way of reading. Typically, we've been asked to read for, oh, what is the main idea? What is the topic? What is the theme? We'll still be doing that a bit, but we're actually going to get down into the nitty-gritty of the language itself and the structure of how the author wrote it and expressed his or her ideas so that we can start replicating that and using it in our own writing. All right, now turn to chapter 6, which is about narration, because our first assignment is going to be a literacy narrative. Now, I know at first that sounds pretty fancy, but if we break it down, it seems very doable. So narrative is a story. It's as simple as it gets. Telling a narrative is telling a story. Literacy is the ability to read and write. And so in this literacy narrative essay, our first essay, you will be telling the story of how you learned to read and write. And you'll see that our 3 readings by Douglas, Malcolm X, and Sherman Alexie are all forms of a literacy narrative about how those authors learned to read and write and the power that it holds in their lives. Okay, and so to get to the full assignment, you'll just click here on Essay 1 Assignment PDF, and it gives you all of the details and instructions. Make sure you review that very carefully the first time, and then you continue to review it through your writing process to make sure you stay on track and you're meeting the requirements of the assignment. So when we move into composing a narrative in Chapter 6, you'll see a bit about brainstorming. On page 99, it talks about where to start, asking yourself the who, what, when, where, why, how. And so as we dump that kind of information, it creates the skeleton of our story. It gives us the baseline details. Okay? The work of our draft will be to put the meat on the bones, to fill that in. Because if you just offered the who, what, when, where, why, it would read like a news story. As they said, those are the questions a journalist asks. So then the details, the imagery, the dialogue, that's the meat on the bones that you're going to fill in. That's the story part. That's the depth we're looking for in telling a story. I do want to point out one thing on page 102. It says templates for drafting, and it talks about using a thesis statement in your narrative. Do not do that. We will use thesis statements for other essays, but in most narratives, we do not have an explicit thesis statement. And you'll recognize that as you read some of these templates. You'll think, wow, when I read a story or watch a movie, which are stories often, I don't remember the author ever telling me this is what it's going to be about. This is a story about. Okay, we don't need to say that. Let your story tell the story. And so you don't need to explicitly point the reader through that explicit telling of a thesis statement. So ignore those templates on page 102 for this essay assignment. The last thing I want to point you to this week is page 103, 104. It talks about developing a plot. Because our literacy narrative covers such a large span of time, obviously from when you were young until you find yourself today in a college class, we don't necessarily have that one distinct building climax down to a resolution. Okay, that's a traditional story path. What you'll probably end up finding is a series of anecdotes throughout your life that build to create this one big picture of your literacy narrative. So don't worry about having necessarily one large plot graph as a traditional story would, but instead you may have a bunch of little plot graphs, little mini stories that you're stringing or threading together to create the big picture of your literacy. So next week, I'll be pointing out some tips and tricks for writing a literacy narrative, as well as posting a model or two of student literacy narratives from past classes. So this week you're reading and discussing and thinking and brainstorming, and then next week you'll actually start drafting. So I look forward to reading your discussion posts and engaging with you online this week. Email me if you have any questions, and see you in class.